Can a marriage built on wealth and careful appearances mask the darkest of intentions? This story reveals how privilege and control can create a facade that hides devastating truth. Michael Reuschel was born into modest circumstances, but had built an empire by his 60s. He was a multi-millionaire businessman who owned properties across multiple states. Mike was the kind of man who measured success in dollars and deals, and he had accumulated both in abundance. His wealth afforded him the lifestyle he'd always dreamed of: luxury homes, expensive cars, and the respect that money brings. His professional success reflected years of focused ambition and control. At 19, while attending the University of Florida, he met Didi Hoffman. Their young love sparked a marriage that would last 25 years and produce 2 daughters, Caroline and Kate. Didi described Mike as gentle and kind, though she noted his focus was often elsewhere. His success in the tech industry had brought him considerable wealth, but it also meant long hours and frequent travel, often at the expense of time with family. When their marriage ended in 2005, the divorce was amicable. Didi moved out, allowing Mike to stay in the family home, so their daughters in college would always have a place to return to, a decision that reflected their continued commitment to co-parenting, even as their romantic relationship came to a close. Not long after Didi moved out, Mike decided to try online dating. He created a profile on Match.com, where he presented himself as a successful businessman looking for companionship. It was there that he encountered Sue O'Brien, a registered nurse working in hospice care. Sue was drawn to Mike's stability and success. After years of caring for terminally ill patients, she was ready for a different kind of life. Mike represented security, comfort, and the promise of a future free from financial worry. Their relationship was filled with expensive dinners, exotic vacations, and the kind of romance that money can certainly make easier. Mike was generous with both his affection and his wallet, showering Sue with gifts and attention. Within months, they were discussing marriage and a shared future. In August 2007, Mike and Sue got married, stepping into a new chapter of their lives together. Shortly afterward, Sue left her nursing career to focus on their marriage and managing their household. They lived in a beautiful home in the exclusive Hale Plantation neighborhood, southwest of Gainesville, Florida. They went on vacations often and made renovations to their home to match their lifestyle. Mike scaled back business trips and even purchased a local dental care practice. He seemed to be adjusting his lifestyle to accommodate his new wife. Mike referred to Sue as his trophy bride in text messages to friends, while Sue seemed genuinely happy to have found a partner who could provide the kind of life she had always dreamed of. Mike's daughters from his first marriage, Caroline and Kate, initially welcomed Sue into their family. The blended family dynamic seemed to work well, with Sue taking an interest in the girls' lives and Mike genuinely happy with his new wife. However, by 2015, messages between Mike and Sue showed that their marriage was falling apart. Most of the tension came from issues with Mike's daughters, especially his eldest daughter, Caroline. Sue was angry at Caroline and often sent Mike hurtful messages about her, blaming their problems on his relationship with his daughter. The tension reached a breaking point when Caroline announced her engagement. What should have been a joyous occasion became a source of bitter conflict. Caroline wanted an elaborate wedding, the kind that would befit her father's status and wealth. Mike, as always the loving father, was ready to provide his daughter with anything she asked for. Sue, however, watched with growing concern as the wedding plans spiraled into extravagance. The guest list grew larger, the venue became more expensive, and every detail seemed designed to showcase the family's wealth. Sue felt that Caroline was taking advantage of her father's generosity and that Mike was too blinded by love to see it. The 2017 wedding on Long Island was everything Caroline had dreamed of, and far more expensive than Mike had originally planned. The final bill was staggering. The wedding was supposed to cost $100,000, but it ended up costing $250,000, even by Mike's standards. Sue was horrified not just by the cost, but by what she saw as Caroline's manipulation of her father's emotions and finances. Even though she had helped with the planning and had bought Caroline an $11,000 dress, the final price tag pushed her over the edge. 3 weeks after the wedding, the conflict escalated beyond words. Mike opened up to Caroline, admitting that Sue had been physically violent toward him. Not just recently, but for some time. Caroline had noticed a long white scar on her father's face at the wedding, which he revealed was from one of Sue's attacks. Mike sent Caroline photographs as proof of the abuse. He shared even more with Caroline, saying that Sue had recently been arrested after a fight about the wedding expenses. According to him, Sue threw her phone at him and started hitting him. But she was the one who called authorities, perhaps thinking they would calm things down. When the police showed up, they told Sue to cool off at the couple's beach condo. She agreed but didn't leave after 30 minutes, so they arrested her for domestic battery. Though she was ordered to stay away from him temporarily, the charges were dropped when Mike chose not to press charges. Sue moved to the beach condo and sought alcohol and anger management counseling. She recognized that her drinking worsened her inability to control her anger and decided to work on herself for the sake of their marriage. On the evening of February 2nd, 2018, Mike invited Sue to their home for the weekend in hopes of reconciling. They went to dinner that night, but the evening went poorly. Caroline's name came up, and the familiar pattern of conflict resumed. Sue remained fixated on the money spent on the wedding, and her resentment toward Caroline was as strong as ever. Dinner ended badly. Mike left the restaurant and drove home alone while Sue followed not long after, arriving by Uber. Each entered through a different door and quietly went their separate ways, Mike to the master bedroom, Sue to the guest room. Shortly after, at 10:13 p.m., she sent a series of texts to Mike saying, "Good luck with your daughter. She will ruin any relationship you have," followed by, "I'm filing for divorce. I will leave in the morning." Everything seemed to settle, until something else disturbed the quiet hours that followed. At 3:30 a.m., Mike called 911, his voice shaking. "My wife and I have been stabbed," he told the dispatcher. "There was an intruder in our house. I don't know what happened. I woke up in bed next to my wife. She was bleeding. The lights were off. I heard her screaming. I was out on the bed for a while. I'm trying to figure it out with my cameras. My arms are bleeding. Hers too." When first responders arrived, they found a scene of violence. Sue was lying in the master bedroom, bleeding heavily from multiple stab wounds. Her injuries were severe and life-threatening, and she was rushed to the hospital for emergency care. Mike also had wounds, though they appeared less serious. He claimed that the intruder had surprised them in their bedroom, attacking Sue first before turning on him. He described fighting for his life and trying to shield Sue from further harm, but investigators quickly noticed problems with Mike's story. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. No broken windows, no damaged locks, no evidence that anyone had broken in. The house was equipped with 10 security cameras. However, when investigators reviewed the footage, security cameras had captured no evidence of an intruder entering or leaving the Reuschel property. The house's own security system showed no signs of having been triggered by an unauthorized entry. By morning, the story began to unravel. Once Sue regained consciousness after surgery, she gave a statement to police. According to Sue's account, after returning home and exchanging angry text messages, she had gone to sleep in the guest room with plans to leave in the morning. Her final text to Mike, sent at 10:13 p.m., read, "You have serious boundary issues with your daughter. I will not tolerate this behavior." Sue claimed that in the middle of the night, Mike came into the guest room and got on top of her. She felt a sharp pressure in her stomach and looked down to see that she had been stabbed. When she asked Mike if he had stabbed her, he confirmed that he had. A struggle followed, during which Sue sustained more stab wounds to her wrist, thumb, and neck. She believed Mike attacked her because he didn't want to get divorced and lose half his fortune. According to Sue, he made that clear during the assault, and when she begged him to call 911, he responded, "No, we're just going to lay here until you die." Sue claimed she lay bleeding for hours, fighting to stay alive, until she finally told Mike what he wanted to hear, that she wouldn't leave him and they wouldn't get divorced. Only then did Mike agree to get help, but not before devising the intruder story to protect himself from prosecution. Mike temporarily disabled the security system to support their fabricated story, hoping it would appear that an intruder had tampered with the cameras. However, Mike's version of events painted a very different picture. He admitted the intruder story was false but claimed Sue was the aggressor. According to Mike, he had gone to the guest room around 10 p.m. hoping to reconcile with his wife, only to find her kneeling at the end of the bed holding a knife. Mike said he feared Sue might hurt herself or him with the knife, so he asked her to give it to him. A struggle followed, during which the knife accidentally entered Sue's stomach. They kept fighting until he managed to get control of the weapon and put it out of reach. He claimed that after both of them were injured, they lay in bed for hours having what he described as the best conversation of their lives. According to him, they talked about their relationship in ways they never had before, even making plans to travel to Tuscany and Greece. He also claimed he was the one begging to call 911, but Sue refused, afraid she would be arrested because of her previous domestic battery charge. According to Mike, it was Sue who came up with the idea to blame the incident on a masked intruder. This claim struck investigators as particularly strange. Sue was bleeding from a stomach wound that would prove life-threatening. Yet Mike wanted the jury to believe they spent hours having an intimate conversation about their future together. Mike's explanation for Sue's most serious injury, the deep cut to her wrist that severed an artery, was equally difficult to believe. He claimed that around 3 a.m., after they had agreed to blame the attack on an intruder, their dog wandered into the room. When Mike went to prevent the dog from jumping on the bed, Sue took the knife and cut her own wrist. He then ran out to disable the security system and waited an additional 25 minutes before calling 911. But the crime scene told a more complex story than either Mike or Sue had initially described. In addition to blood, investigators found feces and vomit in the bedroom. Sue had also sustained a cut to her collarbone that neither version of events adequately explained. These physical details would become crucial as both sides presented their cases to a jury. The defense strategy focused on two key arguments. First, they contended that Sue's threats of divorce were not new. So why would Mike suddenly snap this particular time? Second, they portrayed Sue as having a history of violence, pointing to her previous arrest and Mike's claims of ongoing abuse. The defense also suggested that Sue had previously experienced suicidal ideation, which would support Mike's claim that she had inflicted the deep wrist wound on herself. However, Sue and her legal team denied all allegations of previous violence or suicidal thoughts. The prosecution had a difficult task. They had to build their case mostly on indirect and competing expert testimony. The most critical evidence centered on blood spatter patterns and the timing of Sue's injuries. Meanwhile, the defense brought in their own blood pattern analyst who argued that the evidence supported Mike's version of events. Their expert claimed that if Sue's wrist had been cut around 10:30 p.m., as she claimed, she would have died within an hour. Since she was still alive when emergency medical services arrived, the expert concluded the wrist injury must have occurred around 3 a.m., as Mike claimed. However, the prosecution quickly attacked the credibility of this expert witness. It was revealed that the defense expert had previously had his medical license suspended for storing body parts in Tupperware containers in a refrigerated storage unit. This revelation significantly undermined his testimony in the eyes of the jury. The prosecution argued that the blood patterns on the pillowcase and nightstand came from cast-off from the knife as Mike violently attacked Sue, not from blood spraying out of an artery, as the defense argued. They contended that the evidence showed Mike had restrained Sue during a prolonged assault. Prosecutors also questioned why Mike sustained only minor injuries if Sue had truly been the aggressor. They suggested that Mike had deliberately inflicted minor wounds on himself to support his story, with Sue testifying that Mike had put the knife in her hands and then cut himself to make his account more believable. The prosecution argued that Mike's motive was financial, claiming he couldn't bear the thought of losing half his fortune in a divorce. They pointed to evidence that Mike had been emotionally done with the marriage for some time, including his visits to 3 dating websites during their brief separation. After hearing testimony from both sides, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching their verdict. In July 2019, they found Mike guilty of attempted first-degree murder, along with additional charges of false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, and refusing medical care to a victim. In December 2019, Mike was sentenced to 30 years in prison for attempted murder, with 5 additional years for each of the other charges, to be served concurrently. He was also ordered to pay restitution to Sue, though the amount was not publicly disclosed. However, Mike's legal troubles didn't end with his conviction. After the trial, a fellow inmate in jail filed an arrest affidavit stating that Mike attempted to hire someone to kill his wife while he was awaiting trial. The inmate detailed how Mike gave instructions on staging the crime, disabling the security system, and even offered more than $100,000 as payment. The allegation painted a picture of a man who remained dangerous even behind bars. His ex-wife, Dee Hoffman, who had known him since she was 19, struggled to believe that he was capable of such violence. Caroline, who had been at the center of so much marital conflict, continues to support her father's version of events. At 64 years old when sentenced, Mike faces the reality that he will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. He is currently serving his sentence at the Gulf Correctional Institution in Florida, maintaining his innocence to this day. Sue has since filed for divorce and chosen to live her life away from media attention. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Stay safe and take care of each other.